Okay, so good to see everyone getting started here for this session. And yeah, I think I want to jump into it today with the reading on the decolonizing methodologies, and we're gonna talk about some of this in our breakout groups today, and then come back together and kind of talk through where we're going in this process in terms of starting to think about developing a research question and some activities that we'll be doing coming up here. And so, the reading you had for this week on decolonizing methodologies, is really designed to explore the challenges of institutionalizing a program of research that's conducted by and with Indigenous peoples. In this case, it was with Maori community in New Zealand. And I'll just share real quick my screen. This was an image from the reading. Can everyone see that okay? Okay, great. And so, yeah, it's a little bit blurry, but what I kind of wanted to point out, I know it's a little bit confusing, and this publication has come out, about 20 years ago now, although it still remains a very seminal piece to turn to. This is often the piece when people are first getting into starting to think about how do we decolonize research. The chapter that you read is one of kind of the cornerstones that people around the world still turn to. And so there's obviously been a lot done since then and a lot expanded upon, but kind of just as a place to start and build from, that this has really been a key cornerstone work, and especially for what was articulated as the four directions of the research agenda, where we look at and not that these are, and doesn't have to be linear in thought, thinking of this as a cycle of transformation, decolonization, healing, and mobilization. And that these four directions, these aren't what's really critical to this is thinking about them not as goals or ends in themselves of the research, but that they're processes to think about and how they can be incorporated into your practices and methodologies. And it can be, and we think about, right, at the center of this is the communities and people's self-determination, right? And so where there's kind of different subcategories under each of the four directions. So for example, mobilization, you have local, national, regional, global. All of these things are at scale, or if we think about decolonization, it can be political, social, spiritual, psychological, healing being physical, spiritual, social, psychological, collective, and restoration. And so you're not necessarily always covering all of these things, right? You might be considering, is there some elements that are coming across as most critical at the moment? And so that it's not to say always that, that the end goal of the research is always thinking about, okay, this goal is going to be resulting in mobilization. This goal is going to be resulting in transformation. But it's thinking about your methodologies that you're using in the work and working with the community as to how do those help the process of all of these things. One could argue that none of these is ever truly over. You never truly come to the end of transformation, right? You never truly come to the end of mobilization. Decolonization is always a process. Healing is always a process. It's not like that you're going to come one day and say, okay, we're done. Transformation over. And so we think of what types of methods, what types of practice in the research can support this process. And it's not always going to be all of these things at once, depending on what the community is focusing on, of what's happening in the community of what the needs and priorities are, that can be really challenging to hold this all together, right? But that each of these elements is critical. But at any one time, some are going to come to the surface more. And so, for example, if you're thinking about, working with communities today that have been really devastated by the COVID-19 pandemic, something that might come to the surface most readily is the healing process, right, of what people are going through. Working with a community who's going through conflict and war, right, of thinking about what is coming to that surface first, right, if there's this healing element that seems to be rising as most critical. Not to say that you have to ignore the others, but we find a balance, right, that certain elements are gonna show themselves as being where the focus is for the community at any one time. And there's of course tremendous overlap and cross connections between these. So it's, by going through, say, healing, it's also working on mobilization. There's also working on transformation. It's also working to decolonize. And so there's a deep connection between these things. And so, in thinking about research methods that you might choose for a project, depending on what the question is, and depending on what the cultural context and the community situation is at that moment, we think about, how can our research help support these processes, right? If a community is working on mobilization, how can the research help move that forward? What are the questions to be asking that can help support that process? And so these are things we kind of want to hold in our minds and hearts as we move forward in thinking about, and it's kind of a checking point, right? Is this research really supporting community self-determination? Is this process doing so? Are the methodologies? And we want to check ourselves along the way that even once we've set out, say, a research agenda, plan, and this is what we're going to implement, to remember to take pauses too, and come back and reflect and do kind of even an internal evaluation of, is this doing, say, if it seems like mobilization is really critical right now for what we've set out to do, is it really supporting that, or do we need to make adjustments along the way? So it also serves as a really critical point to come back to learn from and kind of reevaluate, assess if we need to make adjustments on our path. If certain methods and process in the research we thought might be effective for this, maybe they're not, maybe they are, right? But it's making sure that we're coming back and kind of assessing, is it really supporting that, of talking with folks, and may need to make those adjustments to be more effective in this direction. And what I wanted to share, I wanted to be sure everyone saw, and I'm going to put Gunjan on the spot, if you don't mind. I would love if you would be okay with reading the poem that I wasn't sure if everyone saw Gunjan's post on the community discussion forum. And it was beautiful and really powerful, this poem that she shared. And I'm hoping that you might read it for us.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start. I'm not your data, nor am I your vote bank. I'm not your project or any exotic museum object. I'm not the soul waiting to be harvested, nor am I the lab where your theories are tested. I'm not your cannon fodder, nor the invisible worker, or your entertainment at India Habitat Center. I'm not your field, your crowd, your history, your help, your guilt, medallions of your victory. I refuse, reject, resist your labels, your judgments, documents, definitions, your models, leaders, and patrons, because they deny me my existence, my vision, my space. Your words, maps, figures, indicators, they all create illusions and put you on pedestal from where you look down upon me. So I draw my own picture and invent my own grammar. I make my own tools to fight my own battle for me, my people, my world, and my Adivasi self.
Thank you so much, Gunjan. And that, it spoke so powerfully to what, the four directions of of the image we just shared really hold at the center is that self-determination, right? And that this spoke truth to that so powerfully. And we think, what is a process that can lift that up and not squash it, right? And it can be a very thin line. It's kind of that line in research between research that is extractive and research that can be transformational, research that is based on relationships. And in that line of either side of it, right, lies where is it supporting people's self-determination or is it hindering it and squashing it? I think what this poem really articulates so powerfully is what happens when that line is crossed. Thank you so much for sharing that. What I'd like to do is we're going to take just about 10-12 minutes in breakout groups, and based on and actually, I'll put this into just this terrible habit when I go to open a document, I accidentally close it. There we go. I'm going to put this question into the chat. Oops. So I realize that looks very long. This is the question that you had for your discussion forum this week, so it should look quite familiar. We are considering, the decolonizing methodologies reading and what was shared about the four directions we just spoke to as processes that can be incorporated into practice and methodologies. And reflecting on either past research experiences or other forms of engagement in partnership, with the community or current projects or thinking about research proposal for this course. Other elements of any of the processes of transformation, mobilization, healing, and or decolonization align with the goals or aspirations. And thinking about how these elements might be reflected in your methodologies and design of the research project. And I know that that is asking a lot right there. We could probably spend the entire course just unpacking that. And so I'd like us to take, I'm gonna put us into, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm gonna put us into 3 breakout groups. That's for about 10-12 minutes. And I'd like you to share, you can share kind of what you had shared in the community discussion forum. I know it's hard to always, I encourage you all to always, go back and read each other's, but I know, it's hard to always remember to do that and get to do that. And so I'd like you to share now. You don't have to remember verbatim what you put, but share kind of where your thoughts went and how you started unpacking that for yourselves and, of your understandings and kind of takeaways from the work. So I'll put you into the groups now. I'll try to get around to each of them, but don't keep your conversation going. I'm just a fly on the wall, okay? All right, so I will see you back here in about 12 minutes. Sorry, give everyone a moment to come back to the other side here. It always feels like no small miracle when it make it back over. And so stemming from and I'm sorry I didn't get to the third group, but hopefully folks are coming back. Give them a moment. There we go. Hello. Yeah, I want to hear from folks in a moment here, but something that I did hear kind of across the groups a bit is also that while this work was focused on Indigenous research methodologies, and this was specific in what she was referring to with Indigenous group she was working with, is that also it's not exclusive to that. That this can be that how do you think about these types of methodologies and process for anyone, for any community that you're working with and engaging with. You can imagine communities that are going through a healing process, mobilization and transformation, right? That it's not exclusive to Indigenous. And speaking about of this from an Indigenous research methodologies of how would you employ that process in any work you're doing? And it's illustrating more so the difference of that versus a more kind of colonizing what's become this mainstream research paradigm that's often put upon most people. And so it's not putting this into a box in terms of who to engage with, but it's a process. It's methodologies to consider for anyone you're working with. That's kind of counter to what's become this very kind of normative mainstream research approach. And so I'd love to hear from everyone just the next few minutes of just from your groups, if there's any further kind of key takeaways that you learned, kind of things that triggered something for you to maybe help in your own research processes, be it considering for this course or what you're doing now or in moving forward. If you want to unmute or raise your hand or put in the chat.
Well, it really didn't come up much in the discussion, but I probably didn't bring it up because it's a long conversation. But I do, and I've done some work with some people that are probably in line with me on this, but it's hard to find. As a Christian, as someone who's had experience with ministry, it's hard. It's also not just with research. I see this very much with evangelism and religion, stuff like that. Not only just in the way we do things, but literally been the catalyst for a lot of colonization in general. The idea of reforming the heathen, or that, I mean, that's a whole church history class. But one way I just, it's been a struggle for me to balance like the idea that yes, I do believe in an idea of a universal truth that we all should come behind, but also respecting the different cultures, the different realities within different cultures. So for me, it's a hard balance of, and I think Robert said something about the call it swapping stories or kind of transformational stories. I like that idea because it's been a hard line for me to walk because I see a very dangerous way of doing things in development and stuff like that, of like, oh, we have the resources, we have the answers, here you go, we are the savior. But I've also seen very genuine people just take the wrong route, and so it's a hard, for me, it's just something I've thought about a lot, and it's hard for me to balance the two.
I appreciate you sharing that, and I think what you said at the end there too speaks a lot to that. There's a key difference between intent and impact and outcomes, right? That someone's intent can be good and genuine, and truly believing, okay, I want to help you, right? And even that word can be dangerous, help, right? That creates a power dynamic. Whereas the intent is one thing, but what is the actual impact and outcome of that engagement? And I think a lot of what you're pointing to, Austin, that is also about how to hold space to really listen and learn and reflect to each other. That's often done, as Robert shared, through stories, through storytelling, that it's not privileging any one belief or putting one against the other, that there's space for all of it to exist. And I've had this in, like I'm Jewish, I've worked with, communities who are, refugees and evangelical, right? And and they always wanted to convert me, right? To save me in a sense, we kind of had to come to an agreement of, I'm here to support you, but you also have to then respect, right, where I'm coming from, and that we grew together. And it wasn't just a one-time thing, right? It's worked together for 15 years now. It's a continued conversation that is always going to be there, right? But that the point is that you're developing those relationships to open that space to allow for that conversation to be had, and that it's done respectfully, so that it's no one is compromising any of their beliefs, that we can hold true to our own, but yet we can still come together. Um, and that's a delicate balance, right? And that's where a lot of that it's something that happens over time. That it's not something to be resolved, or solved. Um, that in itself is a process of engagement for open dialogue, and that's where it becomes really critical to have that very careful attention to listening and active listening. And doing this work also involves a lot of self-reflection, right? Because we all hold our own biases, we all hold our own truths. And so something you tell me, I'm channeling it through my experiences, through my belief system, through my truths, right? So any of you might tell me something, may tell me a story even, and if I go to reflect upon that, it's going to come out of me different. I might emphasize something different. Um, I might, you know, share what when I reinterpret it, it could be a whole other um, key component that's coming out, right, than what you might have intended. And so we always have to be aware also of ourself in this process. Um, and if what people are saying and the stories that they're getting across, that we're holding true to their accounts, right? That which can be really tricky, that it's not just being reinterpreted through our lens. And that's why I say too, it's a continued dialogue and relationship together. And say if doing research with folks in these contexts, that it's also not about, okay, we're done with this work here, I'm going to now produce something. Maybe I'm producing it for you, but okay, here I'm tinkering over here, I'm putting all this together, all this data, la la la, I got it all, I'm analyzing it, and then boom, here you go. Well, no, there's a process there that's continually coming back to folks to say, hey, is this what you meant? Is this right? I create these digital stories with communities that are storytellers. That was a very false kind of way for them to tell a story, because they'll tell a story in 7 hours. And I was like, okay, we're gonna do this in 3 minutes. Right. And so and it was for specific purposes why we were doing this, but that to craft that story together, I was involved in helping them to write that, but that each word had to be checked together. Is this how you would say it? This can't be how I would say it. And just something like that. It was painstaking weeks and months to do just these 3-minute things, but that it had to be that this is exactly how you would say it. I'm just trying to help, support kind of synthesizing to get this to where you can share it in the way that you're wanting to. But that it couldn't be just me listening, writing that down, and okay, here's your story, right? That continuous process of iteration is deeply important. And similar to what we talked about last week in terms of how things can get truncated at the start, that there's rarely sufficient time dedicated to the starting point, right? That often folks are jumping in with data. We have to collect data. That data collection is often the shortest part, right? That what comes first, and then what comes through iteration and dialogue together, right? So that it's not, we often think about the research process as very linear, And that's very problematic. And so if you think about what Betsy Taylor shared in our second class of talking about that action research cycle, right? And that cycle is a very important part. And then it's not also, she was trying to simplify it a bit just for the sake of time. But when you actually get into that, even that cycle has different paths, right? And that you're going back and forth between even that cycle. It's not just this nice continuous cycle you're moving in. There's a lot of mess between there into what parts you're working on. And so sometimes problematic, because sometimes we're just trying to simplify something as we talk through it, but really it doesn't have to be complicated, but it's complex. And I think that's very important to consider too, especially, if we're coming more from kind of a quantitative research lens. Sometimes qualitative work, more ethnographic work, it can be seen as like soft and easy, right? That we actually, when you get into it, you realize it doesn't have to be complicated, but it is very complex and intricate. And each step that you take can be deeply impactful to the next step, to your relationships. So each move has to be thought about very, very carefully and intentionally. And that you're doing that assessment process along the way to kind of both reassess kind of yourself, right? Like, am I staying true to this? And reassess the process, having that conversation. Is this working for folks? What did they want to see happen? Often, I do a lot of work in the disaster field and in hazards and disasters. I talk about when people are working often in emergency response and disaster recovery, the first very most basic question rarely gets asked, right? Who lives here? And what would you do? Right? That sounds pretty basic, and those questions rarely get asked. And you can also translate that into the research context as well, right? That even in one place, there isn't just one culture. There isn't just one community, right? And wherever you all live, right, you can think about how many different people, different kind of cultural groups, population groups, how people come together might exist, right? That it's not just one homogenous group. And that becomes really important to think about also in research and how people engage together and what's appropriate. I think we had talked about, say, for example, what kind of space is opened of, are people having meetings with the whole community there? And well, none of the women were speaking. Well, is it just because women aren't going to speak up, or is it because you should have had a meeting with just women there? And maybe if you're a man, should there have been a woman facilitating it? Having to know what's appropriate in different contexts. So someone could come in and think, oh, okay, women just don't speak up here. Well, you have a meeting with women, the women facilitating it. All of a sudden, that meeting's going to go for 12 hours because people might have a whole lot to say, right? And so we have to take all of these kind of into consideration in the work. And we think about kind of where we're going with all of this is, in this course, what I'm asking you to do is really to develop potential research questions for a research proposal, right? So in this course, I used to have folks actually do the research project. And then that changed quite a bit with COVID last year. And so we decided to shift it a bit this year as well, and see what would happen of, really focusing on the question proposal process. And I'm going to come back around to this in a second, but I am going somewhere with this, but that you are, in a few weeks now, kind of getting into mid-April, we're going to be coming to class of really working through our research questions. And so I want you to start, as you're going through these coming few weeks and thinking about what you have been reading and engaging in, of thinking about, of it might be a community you're already working with, of maybe, Robert had mentioned just moving to a place and communities there he'd love to engage more with, right? So it might be maybe a community you've never worked with, right? But or maybe starting relationships with, of it might be where you live, it might be somewhere at a distance, that really be thinking about, holding in your mind a particular place and what questions might be important to that place. Um, it might be where you did the transect walk, but as I said, in doing that, you didn't have to do it, in a place where you were, where you're doing research. But I want you to really think about, developing that research question. And that sounds, again, very easy. That is like often, right? We have questions that are this. And so, because what we're going to do together is get your question that's here and bring it down to here. Okay. And as part of this is what we're moving towards is really drafting questions from that for an interview that you'll do with. Now it could be, if you're holding in mind, okay, I want to work, I work with this community and they're 1,000 kilometers from where I live, and well, there's no way I'm going to be able to interview anyone for this, right? That it could be, thinking about a question that is relevant, but it might have to be, like talking with someone in your family or a close friend that might be able to speak to these issues, right? Might not necessarily be in the place that you're wanting to engage in specifically, just for the sake of this course, and recognizing you can't always, if the folks you're working with are 1,000 kilometers away, you might not be able to get to them for the purposes of this course. And so, what we're working towards is developing that research question, of going through the practice of developing questions for an interview, doing the interview, and then going through kind of narrative segments of the interview together. And so that's kind of, and I want you to look, and I'm calling this out next, I want you to look ahead in the syllabus as to where we're going with this, to start preparing ahead of time, so that a few weeks from now, you're not penning a research question overnight and then, okay, I'm going to go interview someone tomorrow, and then I'm going to put that into text for discussion in class. That those things are all going to creep up real quick. And so, it is already mid-March, and so that's why I wanted to raise this now and make sure it's at the forefront of your attention, is as we're talking about these things, that it's not just hypothetical, right? I really want you to think about in the context of, if you're really going out and engaging in this work. And part of the reason I'm sharing that now as well is, there is an opportunity that's arisen within Future Generations, that they're looking at doing basically, the wording isn't quite right yet, but it's kind of like doing a data collection course in the summer and then a research 2 course in the fall, where, so if folks who are interested in this, so I will say, to do this, you need to be enrolled in the master's program and be farther along than your first semester. So, if this is your first semester right now, this might not work so great. I mean, you could have, opportunity moving forward, but just kind of where folks are kind of in the process of this program. And so what the idea is, and this is why I'm bringing this up now too, in the context of when you're thinking about kind of research question and research proposal and methodologies for this course, that if folks who are interested in pursuing this, it would be 6 credits, so 3 credits in the summer and then 3 credits in the fall. So it'd be a pretty significant part of your program. That basically the proposal that you're designing for this course would be designed so that you would go and actually be doing the research and then carrying it through from basically the summer and the fall. So for some folks, you might be doing this research proposal for this course, and I hope that it's not just a practice for this course, right? That we're actually thinking about things of how we're really engaging, that you're not doing it just for the sake of this course. So even if, you know, it never fully comes into fruition, that you are holding it as something, okay, if I'm really going to go and do this, what does this look like? But then for folks who are, you know, interested in kind of pursuing this avenue, this path, that the idea would be the proposal you're putting together in this course, you would then carry that research out this summer and organizing it in the fall. And so if that, so I wanted to kind of just put that out there now. You know, I would say to everyone, think about it over the next week. And then if it's of interest to you to pursue that, to do this, where you do the, you know, so this would be 6 credits of your program. So if that's an interest to you, then what we'll do is, so I want you to kind of think about it, right? Because it's, you know, something to think about, of just what your timing's looking, what summer's looking like, if you, you know, what your plans are, if you want to be taking this on now. And so, yeah, think about it for the next week. And what we'll do is then next Thursday, if this is of interest to you, we'll meet during my office hours to talk about it more. And then, and of course, if office hour timing doesn't work, we can find another time to meet. So I would recommend, you know, taking the next week to think about it. And if it is of an if it does seem to spark an interest, then we'll speak about it kind of later in next week, if that sounds good to folks. So with that, we're just about out of time. I do want to see if there's any questions, but just wanted to remind folks that, so coming up this week, we're doing some reading on quantitative and mixed research methods. A lot of this, there's just a few pages of reading, but then I have a few kind of fun videos. Again, I don't know if these videos are kind of silly for you, but a little silly, but they actually, they make the point quite succinctly and well, and a little break from reading, I hope. So there's a few videos uploaded for you for this week. And then also a reminder that your first quiz, there's 2 quizzes in this course. The first one is now live, if you will, on the Moodle site, and you'll have until next Monday night university time to complete it. It's not meant to challenge or break you. It's not meant for you to like study a bunch ahead of time. Like, I would go in and see what it's about. It's kind of to, you know, to see where everyone is. And you can also, it's just 5 short questions, and you can retake it too. Like, so basically you go through it. If you're not satisfied with your score, you can do it again until you're satisfied. So with that, are there any questions? Oh, Robert, yeah.
Hi. In reading through the posts, well, and just what you said real quickly here. Well, I want to put Kristen Dawson on the spot because I really enjoyed reading her post because it was very concrete and solid and tied to an idea of development and community. And mine was completely the opposite. Mine was just totally abstract, and I was just still, you know, turning my wheels and trying to think. And I know Yoon enjoyed his comments very well, as many others. Was also in the process of asking these questions, and you can just see it in our post. And well, but I would like to, what would you suggest? I have a very solid idea, but I don't know if it's within the scope. And my idea has to do with knowing how they do cattling here, how they do that specifically. And I know there's experimental people with longhorn, which I thought was strange for here, and also bison. So that's all within about 15 miles from here. So why that's central to what I'm doing is because that goes hand in hand with urban development plans and also what the community thinks of itself, how it's going to grow. And often these folks, either they tend to be left as hobbyists, or do we want to rethink diets? Do we want to think growth of cities? It's all tied in to what we eat. And here we eat. But so was wondering if that would be something that, obviously I have a lot of gateway in there because I come from that background, and so it's really easy to get in there. But, or is it outside of the scope?
Oh, no, it's absolutely within it. And I'd say to, you know, what Robert's posing is a really good example, I think, for folks to think about of often to, you know, there are some really big questions in there, right? And so we also have to keep in mind, you know, we're not going to answer all things at once, right? Often, you know, we want to go in and it's like, you know, there's actually, you know, a question that we're posing. There might actually be 10 questions within that. And to really do it well, we want to go deep, right? And so, and that's where I'm going to start pushing all as we start developing these research questions. You'll probably start to get pretty frustrated with me because I'm going to be pushing, I guarantee almost everyone, because no matter, because I do it too, right? That we need each other on this. That's not just going to be me. We're going to be doing it with each other as well, because I am just as guilty of it, of having, I'm going to come in with this research question and I need someone else to like help because this is this big and I need to scope it down here. And so what can help sometimes is what you did just there. We think about kind of these different issue streams, and then you think about the kind of the nodes that connect them, right? And there might be several nodes there connecting these points. And it can be, we run the risk of becoming more superficial in the work if we're trying to tackle too many nodes at once. Right. And so we start thinking, and this isn't to say, I mean, I'm a firm believer in everything connects and we have to look at this holistically. And so there's a little bit of a back and forth here, right? Not to say that we're not looking at it holistically, but that in framing the question, because you want to get as narrow as possible, because as you do the work, it's going to go further out. And if we start too big, we run the risk of being very superficial in it. And so it's not to say that we don't think holistically and we don't think how everything connects together, but that we're trying to channel things through a specific question to hold together that I guarantee, and you know, some of you have probably had a lot of experience with this, almost always you're never going to end with the same question you started with. And that's part of this process too, is sometimes that can be really challenging to let go of your question, right? Even if you've worked with the community on this, even if the questions come from the community, this is what they want to see through this process, it's rarely gonna be the same question that you started with. And that's really important too, to let go, to not feel, okay, this is what we're focusing on. This is the question we posed. This is what we have to be looking at responding to. No, that was your start. Which is also why it can be helpful to kind of to really scope in a bit. And so that's what we're going to be working on to get this balance. I mean, you couldn't go too small, right? We don't want to go tiny. But often when we're thinking about research questions, we start really, really big, right? And we're gonna zoom in, and then you're going to end up in a different place, most likely. But absolutely, that is very much within the scope of doing this. Yeah. So I know we are out of time, but I'll be sending out kind of the process email by this evening as to, you know, what's coming up here. And as always, just be in touch with any questions along the way. And I'm excited for what's coming next, y'all. Thank you. Hope everyone has a good rest of the day and evening. All right, be well.
Thank you.